I want to get us started, get us kicked off. My name is Rhett Lindsay. I'm the Vice President of Mission Advancement for the Anti-Cruelty Society. I've been here almost 2 years. It has been a life-changing professional experience for me, for sure, after working in human services for almost 2 decades. So really happy to be here. Thanks again for everybody for joining us. I also want to recognize our Rose Faye Thomas donors, Rose Faye Thomas members, Humane Heroes, and our Open Door monthly sustainers. This is a huge benefit to you just to learn more about our work. But today's conversation for sure is a little different than what you've heard in the past in our behind the scenes. So we're really, really excited to bring this conversation to you. Let me just double check my notes. And then just want to, again, thank Claudia Hogg-Blake for joining us. And I'm going to turn it over to Tracy to take it from here.
Thank you, Rhett. Welcome, everybody. I want to also introduce Lauren Wisbaum, who is our Director of Donor Stewardship. She is with us today and is doing a great job. Rhett is doing an absolutely phenomenal job in his work. We're having a lot of fun. So today is day 116 of our 500-day journey to 125. We launched it on the 500th day from our, the 500th day from our 120th anniversary. Our 124th anniversary is coming up very quickly, and Rhett's going to tell you about that before the end of the session. But our 125th anniversary will be March 7th, 2024. Everybody on this call knows that. We're going to be having a gala that we're putting together right now. We are engaged in a 500-day journey, which is a funding effort to advance our guiding principles of open door and best care. So we are raising money to support River North shelter enhancements. There's some areas of this shelter that need modernized according to the current scientific standards for best care sheltering. And we'll be significantly expanding our efforts in the community to provide help to families that include animals who may need our help in providing them. They live in under-resourced communities and where vet care is not available, and if it is available, it may not be affordable, and other kinds of support. So it's really fascinating that we're going to hear today a really unique and different approach and angle on the human-animal bond. And I've heard a bit about it, and I can't wait. This really excites me. And I told Claudia when she gets her book written, which I know this is going to happen, right? We want to be early readers and perhaps have an event here, but we're going to really hear some marvelous things about the human-animal bond and the way that Claudia is approaching that. But we've been thinking about that for a long time. In fact, we changed our mission statement to include people. It says that we build healthy and happy communities where people and pets thrive together, people and pets. And we really believe that the human-animal bond has a great deal of power to bring comfort, to bring better health outcomes, to heal brokenness, even the brokenness of communities. And that's really what the 500-day journey is all about. And you're going to hear more about these efforts in the coming weeks and months. And I know that all of you are already engaged in some way in that effort. So we really appreciate your help, and much more to come about that. So we have evolved our thinking and our approach from we are here to protect animals against bad people. That's still true in some cases, to we are here to help people who love animals care for and support their animals, and to make sure that everyone has access to the love of a pet all throughout our community. And once you have a pet, that you have access to the care that is required to take care of that pet. And but the human-animal bond, is so interesting, fascinating, complex, and complete that there are lots of people taking different approaches at looking at it, and Claudia Hope Blake is one of those. As soon as I believe Barbara might have sent us this link to her to an article about her, and I immediately was captivated by it. So I'm going to just real quickly introduce Claudia, and then she's going to take us through, I think, a fascinating set of, I'm going to ask her some questions, but with such a small group here today, there's lots of time for all of us to engage in a conversation. So, to begin with, Claudia is a teaching fellow at the Department of Philosophy at the University of Chicago. Her research focuses on the philosophy of love. Isn't that a wonderful thing to spend your life thinking about? When you get love figured out, Claudia, will you let me know? And then also the philosophy of the human-animal relationship. She adopted her dog, Gracie, from the Wheaton Terrier Rescue Foundation in 2016. She received her PhD in philosophy from the University of Chicago in 2022 for her dissertation. I just love this, Loving Gracie, an account of human-animal love. That makes every other dissertation that's ever been written in history boring. But nevertheless, Claudia, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your thoughts. So if you want to unmute Claudia, I'm going to ask you some questions. And then the audience can engage as well. Oh, hi, Barbara. Welcome. Nice to have you. So, Barbara, since you just joined, our guest today is Claudia Hope Blake, who's a teaching fellow at the University of Chicago, who studies the philosophy of love and also the philosophy of human-animal relationships. And I just should say, Claudia, you are with a sympathetic crowd today, for sure. As I said when we were doing our rehearsal yesterday, we're all crazy in the same way that you are crazy. So we have a bond. So Claudia, first, tell us about Gracie.
Yeah, so she's my dog. She's a Wheaton Terrier poodle. They call it a woodle. And I adopted her from the Wheaton Terrier Rescue Foundation when she was about 6 months old. And she's now almost 7. So I've had her about 6.5 years. Yeah, and really it's really hard, she's sort of transformed the way I think about animals. And yeah, so in some ways, like, adopting her was a sort of transformative period in my life. But also she's been this source of stability as well, because when I adopted her, I was actually with my first husband, and then I got a divorce and sort of went through that phase of divorce, and then sort of being single for the first time in my adult life, and then entering a relationship, and then eventually getting married to my second husband. And so throughout all of that, Gracie has really been my my most sort of stable relationship throughout all that change. And so yeah, she's been just an intimate companion through it all.
So were you interested in the human-animal love before Gracie, or did your relationship with her focus you on this interest in your academic career?
Yeah, it was totally her. Usually, in philosophy, a project will be born out of reading the sort of philosophical literature that you're interested in and finding something in there. But for me, it really came from life with Gracie. I remember adopting her and just feeling like falling really, really quickly and deeply in love with her. Like, I was originally fostering to adopt and was trying to take that very seriously. But the first night, she slept in my bed, and I woke up, and my then husband were just like, obviously we're keeping it. She's part of the family already. But I was really struck by that. Right, I expected to love her, but I didn't realize that it would be so kind of strong and profound, and I had like such deep attachment and immediate. Like, I started to get these recurring anxiety dreams where she'd like run into the road just as I would like wake up, and so I was really, really centered around her. But while I was undergoing that experience, I was actually taking a graduate seminar in the philosophy of love, and I was really struck by the fact that these philosophers were either sort of implicitly or explicitly denying the possibility of having this genuine love for a non-human animal. And so on the one hand, I just thought, well, that's just not right. And so, you know, on the one hand, I thought this is not right. I want to sort of correct this view. But on the other hand, I also thought that they were missing out on something really fascinating, because, you know, on the one hand, right, it's just really obvious to me why I would love Gracie, right? She's great, like, no sort of question there. But on the other hand, from a certain perspective, I'm sometimes just really struck by this. Like, I often think, like, God, how is it that our little family is like me, my husband, and a dog? Like, this strange, fluffy creature is somehow one of my best friends. And from that point of view, I just found it really interesting as well. Like, how is this possible?
That's absolutely remarkable. So in your classes, you discuss that our love of pets and animals has been missing in literature. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Right. So there are, I should say there are a few exceptions to this, but for the most part, there are kind of two general trends. So on the one hand, there are those views that, and this is assuming that, I accept this assumption that there is a distinctive kind of love that we have for, what we might call like our special somebodies, such as like our friends, family members, romantic partners, that is special. It's distinct from any way that we might feel about like a mere thing. And what most philosophers do is they assume that that is limited to human beings in some way. And so some of those philosophers will mark off that love as specifically between human beings as this kind of biological species. But the problem with that is that it's not clear why love would be limited in that way, just based on like a species marker. And then alternatively, there are these views that say instead, well, no, really love is limited to what they call persons, and that's used in quite a technical philosophical sense to mean creatures like us who are capable of a certain kind of reflective self-evaluation. So
Right.
they think about, they reflect on and assess their own mental states, their own motivations, their own desires and values, such that, we have a conception of who we are, who we want to be, that kind of an identity, which it seems like, as far as we know, right, most or all non-human animals, they don't do that. And these views say love is strictly between persons, understood in that way. Now, there's a few problems with this. One is that it would also rule out the possibility of genuinely loving a human infant. And, in the face of, for example, parenthood, that just seems obviously wrong. It would also rule out the possibility of loving certain humans with, severe intellectual disabilities, insofar as they don't have those capacities. And again, that doesn't seem right. And so on the face of it, there must be something wrong with that view, right? Even if you don't already accept that we can love non-human animals. But also, these views have a strange focus. So just by thinking of love as this kind of reflective appreciation of a being who has this kind of identity, and appreciating that person for who they are, and ultimately as a being who has the capacity to reciprocate that kind of reflective appreciation. Like, sure, I think that that does come into our loving relationships, but it doesn't capture all of it. It forgets what we might see as more kind of animalistic aspects of love, like the desire to be with and be near our loved ones, the desire for its bodily, flesh and blood kind of connection and touch and physical intimacy. That especially like in light of social distancing in the pandemic, I think we all see is like we need that, and it's really a central part of our love. Like, connecting with loved ones over the phone or over Zoom is just not the same.
Right.
And so I think that those views forget that as well. And so there's obviously a problem with them.
So how has your research over the time that you've been doing it on this human animal love, how has it changed from the beginning? how has your intellectual exploration and also your personal exploration of this changed over time?
Well, I think in the beginning, I was really concerned with how these philosophers deny this experience, right? And I really wanted to defend the possibility of loving a non-human animal in a way that is full and genuine. And I still want to do that, but it's also, it gets tiresome after a while because it's obvious. Like it's like this, and I think it's obvious to a lot of people who are not philosophers, and philosophers almost create this problem for themselves. And so, right, I am interested in doing that. I'm interested in trying to point out, well, what's going wrong with these philosophical views that makes them have such a glaringly, obviously wrong conclusion, I think. But there's only so much joy you can get out of kind of combating those people who are just trying to deny your experience. Right. And so I'm also really interested in asking sort of the further questions. Well, like, so given the possibility that we can love non-human animals, because, you know, we say that we can, you know, people should take our testimonies as given there. What does this tell us about love in general? And what does it tell us about our nature as lovers? And I sort of, you know, already alluded to that a little bit. In that I think that, you know, we're not just people who have a sort of reflective appreciation of others. We also want this bodily connection. And then also, this is something that I want to explore further in my own research, is what might the possibility of loving animals tell us about their moral status? When we love another, we take the perspective of their being kind of like infinitely precious. We become so certain of that when we love them. And I think that love has a kind of authority there. It tells us something that's true that we might not be able to sort of access by other means. And so it has implications for how we treat animals, I think.
Unbelievably interesting. So you're among animal lovers here, as I said, and I suspect at one time or another, all of us have asked the questions: do our dogs or cats or rabbits or whatever really love us, or are we just the treat provider? Can we know that animals can overtly share affection and love, but can they really return the love that owners give them in some deeper sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think the way that we love animals and the way that animals love us is different in important aspects. But I think that's also true of you know, the way adults love children. It's not the same way that children love adults, for example. Right. So right, there are certain aspects, right? Like I talk about how much I love Gracie all the time. I sit and think about how wonderful she is. And I don't think she sits and thinks about how wonderful I am. But that's okay, you know, and there's also ways in which I'm like selfless with Gracie. You know, she will always tell me when she wants some of my food, which is every time I eat. And she'll, you know, unless it's not safe for her, she will get some. There's absolutely no chance she would ever voluntarily share her food with me, right? She's just, this would not enter into her mindset at all. And so in those ways, it's different, right? You know, Gracie doesn't sort of feel or experience like commitment, I think, in the same way that people do. But because I think we need to shift the sort of image we have of the way that we love, right? It's not just limited to this kind of like reflective valuation. We can see the ways that it's more continuous with the ways that non-human animals love. And so when we can see that continuity, we can see, well, right, we could call all these things love, but they're just different and manifest in different ways. And then, you know, there's also, once we do that, there seems less reason to prioritize the way that humans in particular love, and to say, well, that's real, and somehow these other versions of love are not. And so, right, I see no problem with saying that our dogs love us, right? I think they do care, they're attached. They in some way experience us as important. And so, yeah, I think they love us.
I think we're all relieved by that answer, right? So you teach two classes right now, one called Love and Personhood, and the other is topics in animal ethics. I told you yesterday I'd love to re-enroll to take those. Tell us a little bit about those 2 courses.
Yeah, so topics in animal ethics I taught last quarter, and that we cover like just basically questions about the moral status of animals, and what is it about them that makes them morally important, and how do we know those things about them. And also, I think whenever we're thinking about the moral status of animals, we can't help but think about like their moral status specifically in relation to other human beings. So there's lots of interesting debates about that. That was really fun to talk about students with. And then we do briefly touch as well on the possibility of loving animals and what that might tell us. And so we watched it's a documentary called Peaceable Kingdom. It's about a lot of small scale farmers who independently of one another become vegan and completely change their lives and the way they relate to animals. And the way that this documentary sort of portrays the issue is it really captures the kind of preciousness and individuality of the animals. It doesn't focus too much on the kind of gore of the meat industry, which is, I don't like to engage with that too much. But instead it's really moving because you see that these are subjects of lives, and it matters how we treat them. And I think that's quite a loving perspective to take. So we talk about those issues in that class. And then in Love and Personhood, we address this question of the role that philosophers have ascribed to personhood in understanding love. And so we begin by looking at philosophers who think that love is essentially something that occurs only between persons. And then in the second part of the course, which we're just kind of getting into now, we look at a number of views that push against that. So we're reading this philosopher Eva Kitay, who talks about her relationship with her severely intellectually disabled daughter, and how it led her to really reassess what she thought was so central to humanity. And then we're going to be looking at memoirs of there's a woman, it's called Mothership, I'm forgetting actually the name of the author, about having prematurely born twins and her experience of that. And those twins would not be considered persons yet under the philosophical description. And then relationships with animals, reading a paper by Barbara Smuts that's really amazing. And we're going to be watching an episode of the Netflix series Dogs that looks at human dog relationships. So yeah, that's really fun as well. Yeah, so I have some really good conversations with students.
Fantastic. This sounded like incredible classes. I failed to clarify before, are these graduate or undergraduate classes?
Undergraduate. Yeah, wow. They're mostly sort of advanced undergraduates.
That's great. One more question for me, and then we'll open it up to anybody who wants to engage. Give us some homework as we leave today. What nuggets of information would you like us to think about? Since you're a philosopher, give us some philosophical homework to do to sort of elevate this conversation to the next level.
Yeah, so something that I've been thinking about a lot recently is, so I think a lot about the possibility of love and what that looks like and what it tells us, but there's also this issue of how we love well. So in our human relationships, we try to live up to love in a certain kind of way. We try to treat our loved ones in the way that love demands, and there's an open question about what exactly love does demand and how to love well. And I think that it's important to think about that with our animals as well. Like, how do I do a good job of loving Gracie? What does it require of me? And I think what I've been thinking about in those terms is learning to try not to project too much onto her. We're all prone to projection in relationships, right? Even with human beings. I think love demands that we try not to do that. Try to see the other as they really are. Try to appreciate their perspective and give that importance. Have empathy. And so I've been trying to do that a lot with Gracie, but I think it's, it's an ongoing kind of question of like, what does this require, and how do I do a good job of loving my animal companion?
That's fantastic. So I know these people on this call, and they are going to ask questions, and Barbara Provost is going to start. She always does. So Barbara.
Thank you, Claudia. First, thank you so much. You're preaching to the choir, as I hope you figured out, but it's delightful. I did read about you in one of the U of C newsletters or something several months ago, and I thought, oh man, this sounds terrific. Somebody's validating how all of us nutty people feel. Also, I want to say congratulations that you got Gracie in your divorce. That would have been very interesting. You know, people do have custody battles over their pets, as I'm sure you probably know. I've got a lot of questions, but I'm going to only ask one now and give everybody else a turn. But, you know, Shelley Rubin, who's on the call with us, he's another board member of Anti-Cruelty and a veterinarian. Shelley, you said something once years ago at a board meeting that you had many clients, human clients, who were devoted to their pets and had very poor, if any, relationships with other human beings. I'm probably not quoting you well, but I think that was the gist of it. So my question, Claudia, is, I guess, is it possible then for a human to love an animal, but for some reason not have the ability or not have the capacity to love another human being?
Hey, that's a great question. I mean, I guess so. Like, I feel like, I mean, I would want to say that there might be something important missing from our lives if we don't have human relationships, just like I think there's something important missing in our lives if we don't have human-animal relationships. But they do have really important differences, right, that I think can, in some respects, loving an animal is more difficult. Like, it's hard in that we don't, there are obvious barriers to communication, although, some kinds of communication are quite easy. Other times it can be hard to know what your animal needs or what they're asking for, and hard to imagine our way into their world. But in other respects, it's easier, right? Like, we don't have resentment really, or I think ought not to have resentment. Like, there's no kind of I don't ever feel like Gracie wrongs me in a way that, like, I might feel that people wrong me, and that can make it really easy. Like, it's simpler. And so in that respect, I can imagine, like, there's no judgment, there's not really much, like, any shame in those relationships. And sometimes I think human relationships can be really hard for people, right, in a way that everything just feels simpler and easier when you're around animals. So I could imagine, right, that being the case. I think it's a shame. I think that ideally we would also be able to, or like, have this all tools and resources to be able to forge like important human relationships. But yeah, maybe it is possible to just love animals.
Yeah, I mean, I think many people often refer to the unconditional love from animals. And I think that's a real distinction between the human, as you just mentioned, there's judgment, there's resentment that occurs. But it seems that with animals, whether they're an animal that likes to be cuddled or not, because some animals don't like that, but there is something that's just unconditional, it seems, about a relationship with an animal, my experience at least. And you hear that frequently, of unconditional love. So.
Right, for sure. Yeah, I feel like, no matter how your human relationships are going, you come home to your animal companion, and they, as long as things are going well, right, they're always happy to see you. I think there is a darker side to this, right? In that, like, we wouldn't, in some ways, right, we wouldn't want the animal's love to be unconditional. Like, I wouldn't want Gracie to accept any kind of treatment from me, right? And obviously this is something that we're all invested in working against. But right, as long as we're nice to our animals, right? Like, it's not like we get judged for the same things that human beings are going to judge us for. Like, I feel like we don't feel embarrassed in front of our animal companions. We don't feel ashamed. We don't feel any kind of like social pressure in that same way. And right, we don't ever feel, I think, like let down by or abandoned by our animals. So yeah, in that sense, I think the unconditional nature of love is really important.
Has Gracie ever chewed any of your shoes?
Yeah, luckily I'm quite easygoing with that kind of stuff. Like I always find it funny when she destroys something. And maybe if it's something really, really important to me, I'd be, but it's always the human's fault, right? It's always, oh, I shouldn't have left my stuff there.
Right.
She's obviously gonna go and chew it.
No, a good approach is to find it funny. For instance, my dog only takes the lining out of shoes. She leaves the shoes perfectly intact, but she pulls out all the, which I find hilarious. Any other questions? I've got one that occurred to me. You know, we domesticated dogs and cats and guinea pigs and other things. I'm wondering from a philosophical point of view, what need did that fulfill? And, you know, even thousands and thousands of years ago when we started to domesticate dogs, it was more than just for helpers. I mean, we know that that was part of it too, but we recognize from some of the early art and the way, you know, from grave sites and things like that, that there was also, you know, affection and love between earlier humans and their animals. From a philosophical point of view, what do you think led to that domestication of both cats and dogs?
Hey, that's a great question. I feel like this is going to be speculative because I'm not by any means an expert in the history of this, but right, I think like aside from the sort of mutual usefulness, I think that it seems to me that there's something sort of quote unquote like natural about the human animal relationship. And my experience at least was that when I developed that relationship with Gracie, I felt like in some sense sort of more at home in the world, like I'd been brought back to my sort of natural state where we're not alienated from the rest of nature, but are really sort of in community with it. And I think that in our sort of, at least in like Western culture, and I think that Western philosophy also really goes hand in hand with this, we really see ourselves as separate from the rest of nature. It's us and them, and we are distinct and we are higher, and we hate our bodies, we hate our bodily functions, anything that we see as like animal. And I think that like having a relationship with an animal also like restores you to yourself in a way. You can be more in touch with your body and your senses in the world. And so, right, in that respect, I feel like these relationships are so natural to us.
Interesting. That's fascinating. Thank you. Anyone else? Fred has a question.
Yeah, I'm thinking about this is sort of a social psychologist type question. I'm thinking of the family unit, wife, husband, child, animals, is it? I mean, Barbara has always told me, Fred, you know, I love you, but just don't ask me a question about rank order. But in a family unit, love for the animal can be manifested in a number of ways. One, it could uplift the whole matter of love in the family unit, or it can disrupt the love equation in the family unit. What, you know, have you looked at that, and what do you have to say about that?
Right, that's really interesting. It's not really something that I've thought all that much about, although it is fascinating. But right, and I think this sort of speaks to the issue as well of differences in how we perceive the sort of validity of human animal love. Right, I think that some people, right, could see you know, could imagine like, I think this is all portrayed in sort of TV and stuff sometimes, of like say there's like a new romantic relationship, but like the dog or the cat is a problem because it seems to be given from one person's perspective way too much importance. And right, I think that it's an issue of like how we understand the status and validity of that love. And sometimes it could seem like really insulting to someone, right, to be like, have their needs not always come before the animals' needs. Right, it's a tricky one. I think that like I would find it really hard to be in relationship with somebody who didn't sort of see that as really valid. But I'm not sure. I think it's a difficult issue.
Fascinating.
Did David have a question? David?
David Harwich. David, you have to unmute yourself. Over on
Can
the
you
left
hear me
there.
now? There we go. I'm sorry about that. This is in concert with the statement you just made. I was wondering if certain animals limit their love to attachment to the people that with whom they are bonded. I recognize the fact that when you're at the shelter, many of the dogs are very welcoming and they're affectionate. I don't know if I would call it love that you're getting from the animal, but affection. But in certain domestic situations where the animal isn't its forever home, they're very, very congenial with the pet parents, if you want to call them that, and hostile to anyone entering that environment. And I wonder if they have the capacity to limit their love.
That's a good question.
Good, yeah, and I guess in some sense, right, like I think there are different ways in which we can use the term love, and so sometimes it's in this kind of broader sense, right, that like we might say that we like love all of humanity or feel particularly loving today, or like sort of are struck by the preciousness of other people in a way, like even strangers that we don't know, right, that we'd come across in the grocery store, but whatever that is, right, it feels different from the love that I have for like my special people or you know, my special somebodies, which include non-human animals, which does I think it is, I think that attachment is a large part of that. And so right, I feel like it's probably the same for dogs in a way, right, that dogs in some sense, right, people almost say like dogs just are love, they just kind of like exude love. And maybe in that sense, it's something more akin to when we are speaking of love in this general way, that we might feel it for like all of humanity, or all of the animal kingdom, or whatever. But right, in another respect, I think like Gracie, for example, like, you know, she has her favored people, right, which is like me and my husband, a couple of my close friends who she has a bond with. And with other people, right, she might be excited by them or kind of happy to be around them or pleased with the company, but I wouldn't call it love until she maybe has that more established relationship. So yeah, that sounds right to me.
Thank you.
Claudia, one other comment, maybe it's a question too, but you know, to me, I don't know if you call it the opposite, but certainly the horrible part of love is grief. If you lose that person, you know, you lose an animal, we all understand the grief can be, you know, I would think for some people as deep as losing, you know, they've lost a loved one, whether it's human or furry, they've lost a loved one. And our society in general, I don't think recognizes it, but other animal lovers, of course, do. Did you look at that aspect of the relationship as sort of being proof of love for an animal?
Yeah, so I really see love and grief as like going hand in hand. I think that animal grief is good evidence that they can love, and our grief is evidence that we can love them. And I think this is like one of the hardest parts as well of the kind of divide in society between those who get it and those who don't, and how people sort of respond to grief. Yeah, and I think right, in some ways it's right, it's not necessarily, it's not just like less important or less severe or anything like that. Like I think one thing that people sometimes don't appreciate, right, is that I think for a lot of us, and you know, in my case with Gracie, like, you know, I love my friends, I love my family, obviously, but you know, aside from my husband, who's the person that I go home to every night, right? It's Gracie. She's like that absolute sort of stable presence. And in that respect, right, I think the attachment at least is a lot stronger than almost all other cases. And I think that a lot of what grief is the severing of that attachment bond. And so, yeah, I think that I think that grief there is really serious. It really goes hand in hand with the love, and it's often underappreciated.
Yeah, Barbara, we met yesterday to kind of go through our agenda, and then later on in the evening, as I was perusing all my news sources, I came across yet another article. I've read several of them where, for many people, the grief of losing an animal is much deeper and much more difficult to recover from than losing a human companion. So I think we all know that. Well, thank you so much, Claudia, for spending some time with us. This is incredible. I know that people who see this recording are going to be as touched by it as we were, and we wish you all the best in your work. We hope you stay in contact and touch with us.
Sure, yeah, thank you. Yes, it's been really, really fun.
Good.
Don't we get to see a picture of Gracie
Yes, do I?
or Gracie?
Well, should I, actually, if I turn off my camera, you can see. There she is.
Oh.
Oh, there she is. Look at the little face.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Good job.
Judy.
So Rhett is going to give you a little bit more information about some of the upcoming events that we're having, and it's nice to see all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Claudia. Thank you, Tracy. And again, thanks to Barbara Provost. She really sort of brought this to us, and this is a very different conversation for us. We've not had a philosophical conversation, at least in my 2 years of being at Anti-Cruelty, but I know that it's one that we need to have probably more frequently. So thank you for that, Barbara. Just some last notes on the anti-cruelty side of the house. Just want to remind you that this is being recorded. We'll share it with you. It'll have a nice picture of Claudia and Gracie on it for you, Barbara. Also, sort of continuing this conversation, I'm not sure if you noticed, but Jane Goodall will be at the Chicago Theater on March 19th. So if you're interested in that, I just thought it was interesting that conversation is coming up soon after hours. So take a look at that. For us, many of you, I think all of you have thankfully, gratefully responded to the RSVP for our 124th anniversary, our 125th kickoff on March 7th. So thank you for doing that. We look forward to seeing many of you there. For us in the shelter, also that same week, March 6th through the 13th, is National Adoption Week for us. Definitely, if you know of anybody who's thinking about adopting or fostering, please let them know that that'll be a special week specifically for a lot of the shelters around the country, but especially for anti-cruelty. March 24th is our Day of Giving. That is our day. It's sort of like the Anti-Cruelty Society's Day of Giving. It's only for us. We have a number of activities happening in our River North shelter, specifically volunteer opportunities. We'll have an open house that evening. So please join us. You'll be hearing a lot more about that in the coming weeks. And our signature event, Bark in the Park, will be held Saturday, May 20th at Soldier Field. Registration opens in early March, so keep a lookout for that as well. And thanks for joining us. Thanks for being with us today. It's always good to see you. We can't wait to see you very soon in March. So we appreciate all that you do for us and being part of this conversation. So thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good to see you.